Hi, everybody, and welcome to our virtual panel on handling your kids' mental health during COVID-19, presented by Box Kids and Shape America. My name is Jess Garbarino. I run marketing and communications for Box Kids, and I will be your moderator today. A little bit of background on Box. We are a physical activity program typically run in a school environment, but since COVID-19 and resulting school closures, we have pivoted our program to offer at-home physical activity resources for parents and teachers. All of these resources are completely free and will be shared after the panel. We are so excited to be partnering with Shape America on this topic, as we know it's very important to both parents and educators. So I will now kick it over to Michelle Carter from Shape America to introduce herself, and we'll get going.
Hi, everyone. I'm Michelle Carter, Director of Educational Content and Programs at Shape America. And for those of you that don't know, Shape America is the Society of Health and Physical Educators, and we're the national organization that serves as the voice of over 200,000 plus health and PE teachers across the nation. We provide programs, resources, and advocacy that support inclusive, active, kinder, and healthier school cultures, and we champion health and PE teachers at every level, from preschool all the way to university graduate programs. And one we'll talk a little bit later, but we also have our service learning program, Health Moves Minds, which really focuses on our teaching social and emotional learning through health and PE. So we're happy to partner with Box to talk today about children's mental health and to help educators and parents.
Wonderful. I'll kick it over to Dr. Taveras to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. My name is Elsie Taveras. I wear many different hats, but I am a pediatrician and professor of pediatrics at Harvard Medical School and Mass General Hospital for Children. I'm also the executive director of the Crave Center for Community Health, and I also serve on the advisory board for the Box program and have been really fortunate to work closely to evaluate the effects of Box, not just on physical health, but on social emotional health.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us. Dr. Ken Duckworth.
Hello, everybody, and thanks for joining. My name is Ken Duckworth, and I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist, and I've been working on the public health access angle of care. So I'm the chief doc for Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts on the mental health and addiction space. I'll be talking about the developments in teletherapy, which have been quite remarkable. And I'm also the chief medical officer of the National Alliance on Mental Illness for kids who are actually living with more serious emotional vulnerabilities.
Wonderful. And last but not least, I'll kick it over to Daniela and Bo, if you guys could give an intro.
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Bo Chappelle. I'm a physical education teacher at the Daniel Boone Middle School. I've been teaching for 12 years. I'm a certified personal trainer. I'm part of our district-wide SEL committee, and I was awarded 2019 Pennsylvania Middle School Teacher of the Year.
Hello, everyone. I'm Daniela Land. Alongside this fella, we co-founded We Integrated, Wellness Education Integrated, co-authored the book All in the Mindset of Fitness. I work in educational consulting specific to SEL and really like to focus on the inner world of SEL, self-awareness, self-regulation. I'm also a certified yoga instructor and have experience working with prison inmates on ways to foster emotional intelligence and conflict resolution strategies.
Wonderful. Thank you all for joining us. Quick housekeeping item before we get started. We do want to open this up to questions for the group at the end of the questions we've pulled together. So if you would like to add a question, please use the Q&A button you find at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And we have a couple members of our team fielding those. So if you have a specific person you want to direct it to, just include it in that question. All right, so we will get started. How would each of you describe in a few sentences how COVID-19 and resulting school closures have impacted our kids' mental health? Just quick snippet from all of your different experiences and perspectives. We'll go reverse order. So Daniela and Bo, if you want to kick it off and just give us a couple sentences on what you're seeing, that would be great.
Sure. I think that the kids are scared and lonely right now. And the reason I say that is they don't have the structure and the routine that schools provide. So I'm seeing more of that with my students.
I would add to that, I agree, anxious, lonely, unsure. And I think it's also important that we recognize varied, just to recognize each home situation is different. There are a lot of individual factors at play, what coping strategies, self-regulation tools are in their toolkit. And if we take that perspective, it helps us acknowledge, rather than assume how the child feels, let's kind of help them to identify how they feel.
Wonderful. And Dr. Duckworth?
Yeah, I'd like to say I agree with everything that Daniela and Bo said. And I want to emphasize this is all of our first pandemics. And I view this as a continuing learning experience. So, it's great to talk to mental health experts, but it's very important to stay in communication with each other because we're all learning as we're going. There have never been a course in pandemic mental health that I have taken, and I have taken a lot of courses in a career. So I just want to emphasize the community teaching each other component of this, I think, is critical both for educators and for people who are doing the work of exercise, physical exercise, which is a great down regulator for anxiety.
That's a great point. Dr. Taveras?
I would just echo what others have said. I think grief is another word that I would add in the way that the pandemic is affecting children. Grief in many ways. The isolation from friends, potentially, dealing with the death or illness of family members. And it really, I think, is manifesting in so many different ways. The way that grief and loneliness and anxiety and worry about the future is manifesting, and I think we're seeing that in the breakdown of communication and structure. So that would be the only other thing that I would add to what others have said is this profound sense of grief being manifested in various different ways.
That's a really good point as well that I hadn't thought about. Michelle, do you want to add to that?
I mean, they've covered it really well. I might just add the uncertainty, and it's amazing to see it at all levels. I have a 4-year-old. She'll start kindergarten in the fall, and it's amazing to see how, even though she knows coronavirus, but she doesn't know exactly what is going on. She just sees the shifts at preschool, and she asks me daily, are things back to normal yet? So that just speaks to how it's affecting children at all levels. And so it'll be a very interesting discussion today, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And this is a question I think for Dr. Duckworth, but please jump in if there's others. Are there types of mental illnesses that you see as being exacerbated by the quarantine or even just being at home?
Well, Jess, that's a great point. Before this whole thing happened, 1 in 5 Americans were living with a mental health condition. Half of them start before age 15, 3/4 before age 25. So you recognize there's a whole set of people living with anxiety, depression, addiction vulnerabilities. And this kind of stress does generate the risk of recurrence, relapse. So how do you think about, for instance, exercise as a preventive measure for anxiety disorders, exercise to promote healthy sleep, to prevent the recurrence of things like depression or bipolar disorder. Sleep disturbance is one good predictor of recurrence. So the answer is yes. If you look at the NAMI helpline, if you look at the National Crisis Text Line, business is booming. The good news is that people do seem to be reaching out for help. And I feel like that's a triumph of our society's improved conversation about mental health. But I do think there are definitely risks for people. But I think it's also might be an empathy moment, as all of us are finding ourselves kind of chronically stressed and chronically anxious, chronically thrown off our game. I think it may generate more empathy for people who are living with these conditions.
That's great. And, Bo, I'm just interested to hear, as a physical education teacher, do you see your role has kind of evolved into more of a mentor type role since all of this happened? I know that's kind of been the PE teacher's role for a long time, but do you see that as kind of being elevated given what kids are going through right now?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to kind of piggyback off Ken here about anxiety, I find it's really interesting that a lot of my students in particular, they're saying how anxious they are. But what I find fascinating, they're having a hard time describing those emotions. And there's a book that I recommend for everyone out there called Permission to Feel. It's by Mark Brackett, and he's works on Kaizel's board of directors. But he basically talks about processing and handling emotions, and he uses the acronym RULER: R for recognize, U for understand, L for label, E for express, and R for regulate. And the challenge with our youth, I think, is they're having a hard time even doing that first one and have issues with it, with recognizing. To give you a quick example, for maybe parents that have children, or for us health and phys ed teachers, how many times do we go to kids, how are you feeling, or how are you? And they go, oh, I'm fine, or I'm okay. And it's such a cliche answer, but when we dig a little deeper, we can find out what the root of the problem is. Maybe, well, I'm actually mad, and I'm mad because I'm frustrated. And well, now that I think about it, I'm actually really frustrated because I can't speak or see my friends at this time. And what's also really cool, I found this study a few years ago from the University of Rochester, and it had dealt with teens and their emotions. And it said when teens could describe emotions in nuanced ways, it actually curbed against depression. So I think as educators, if we really focus on the emotions of kids and really get a little deeper into it, we can really start to find out what is going on with our youth.
That's great. Michelle, you look like you want to add to that.
Yes, I love it because there's so much. So we're going to flip that into a tip kind of things for our educators who are listening right now. One thing to do that is easy to start, even just with that R, the recognizing, or which in social and emotional learning, we're talking about self-awareness of recognizing our feelings, identifying emotions, and being able to name them. We have what we call like an emoji rating scale, as well as a daily check-in poster available for teachers that you can download for free. And so what you do is at the beginning of class, as students enter the class, you're just getting them to begin self-assessing where they are in that current moment. Where am I feeling right now? They don't have to share it out with anybody unless they're comfortable, because you want to create this culture of trust before we getting into feelings and things like that. And then again, when they leave the PE class, having them do that again. And so speaking to what Dr. Duckworth said, it's beginning them to think about how they felt when they come in, so recognizing emotions, and then when they leave again, well, if my mood changed, what did I do during this time that might have helped me change my mood? Was it because of physical activity? And then you get into the physical activity as a way, a healthy strategy for maybe when you're feeling, frustrated or something like that. So I say that to say we have resources that can help with that. And it's something simple like that you can implement into a class routine. So when we're thinking ahead of next year in the fall.
And that also brings up a good point. Both of our organizations, as well as the panelists, will be sharing a lot of these resources as a follow-up to this panel. So you will receive an email with links that you can download. Any of the things that got brought up today, we'll make sure that we cover in that email. So I see some questions coming in on the feeling chart that you're talking about, Michelle, et cetera, and we'll make sure that those types of resources are shared. I want to switch gears just a little bit and talk about kids right now and how at risk they are for being sedentary during this time. So Dr. Taveras, I don't know if you've seen an uptick given your area of expertise, or if you have any concerns about the lifestyles kids are kind of living right now, and what parents and teachers can do to help get kids moving.
So it's a good question, right? Because I see in the comments that there are pros and cons to the distancing. I've been trying to call it more physical distancing than social distancing, because there are differences. In some ways, as one of the attendees pointed out, life is very different. And as a family, on days when I'm not in the hospital, I make it a point of, having structure in the home and getting out and walking and riding our bike and making sure that we are out with our masks, of course. But in some ways, physical activity as a family has actually improved, and the ability for us to do it together and to emphasize the importance of it has been fantastic. Obviously, with really great resources of what we can do at home, what we can do at very little cost. So in some ways, I think routines, particularly those that emphasize, healthy sleep and physical activity, have improved. But in other ways, just as you mentioned, we are all in front of screens, and children are as well. Their schoolwork, many of the interactions that they are now having is via technology. And that is contributing in some ways to more of a sedentary lifestyle. So I think just as we emphasize with students and that Michelle, Bo, and Daniela have mentioned, it's incredibly important to bring some normalcy to the structure and routine, and to make sure that those routines include physical activity for all of the reasons that others have mentioned.
That's great advice. And Dr. Duckworth, I'm curious, how important are routines for all age groups? What's the role you kind of see that playing as far as our mental health goes?
Routines are good for people, and so are social connections. And of course, many of these things have been distorted. Speaking of disruption, my doorbell just rang, and because I'm working from home, I'm going to answer it. I think it's actually a new computer. Structure is really good for people, but I think flexibility has its place, right? So thank you.
If I can jump in for Dr. Duckworth there, I will say that children crave routines. They crave structure. It's the ways that reduce uncertainty, which I think Michelle mentioned, that helps them know that the world is okay. And so I can't say enough about the importance of giving that semblance of normalcy, even if we are anxious or worried. That sense of normalcy through structure and routines is incredibly important for children, as I see a lot of heads nodding.
Same for adults. So if you've experimented with not getting out of your jammies all day, that might work one day. But the idea, you get up, you go for a walk, you take a shower, you put on a uniform, right? You engage in work throughout the day. Then you take the uniform off. You put on your favorite sports t-shirt, right? So then you're off work and you're creating a kind of structure. And I think there's something to this for adults and for kids to create a sense of normalcy in an obviously grossly abnormal situation.
And just to add on that, I think that's where adults being children, but we're different in how we may react to some of this. But the one thing is that we all have feelings at no matter what age that we are. So even if we're feeling anxious as an adult, then we have a little person who's feeling anxious where they have even less control over their world already. So as Dr. Tavares said, the routines and things are definitely, and as educators, when we're thinking ahead, what routines I already have in my class that I can continue to do even virtually. If it's a morning circle, if it's some kind of instant activity, if it's the way that you greet them every day, continuing those things, even in virtual.
Fabulous at picking up adult emotion, Michelle, to your point. So if you are really struggling with anxiety, it's important to figure out how to get that treated. And I think, there's a lot of services available through Zoom and telehealth now that are being provided across the country. I mean, don't think that because you can't do things, you can't get help right now.
That's a great point. I also want to talk a little bit to that point about pressure and what kind of pressure these kids are under right now as far as demands from schoolwork. I know that it's a new kind of learning environment, and as some parents, we're now all stay-at-home teachers in some capacity. Daniela and Bo, can you guys speak to the amount of work that's being doled out and what parents should realistically expect, and teachers, what we should expect from these kids during this time?
Sure, and I think this can apply not only for the students, but also for teachers as well. It's having those healthy boundaries and setting that time to disconnect. From my personal experience, I noticed when COVID-19 first happened and I was working remotely, I had longer days than when I was in the classroom. So I think it's really important that we set that time for both teachers and the students to say, okay, you know what, I had enough. Or to the flip side, I had a girl that actually reached out to me via Schoology. That's the platform we use. And she said, I just don't know what to do. I feel like I can't stay motivated. So what I tried to tell her is, hey, why don't you try to chunk it into like 20 minutes of 20 minutes, I'm really going to focus on this one class, take a little bit of a break for yourself, and then come back and maybe another 20 minutes later, try to focus on another class. So like I said, I think healthy boundaries is one of the biggest things that we can do going forward.
And just to add on that too, from a teacher point of view, changing and pivoting so quickly to online has been a challenge. And a lot of teachers, if you have a watch or a phone, you're getting updates as soon as your students upload an assignment. And that can be at 3 in the morning or 11 o'clock at night. So I think in addition to what Bo was mentioning about healthy boundaries, turning that off for yourself so that it's not constantly taking up all of your mental bandwidth is important. And also recognizing, and this is something we touched on briefly a little earlier, and Michelle, you can probably speak to this, that there are going to be different home situations that we have. You're nodding your head. I feel like I should just let you talk more about it. Different home situations we need to be cognizant of regarding access to technology. Are parents able to be around to help support their children in having a structure? There's all sorts of variables at play. And I feel like, generally speaking, schools have been understudied with that and have made a tremendous effort to provide resources. But look, it's far from perfect, right? We're doing the best we can.
Michelle, do you want to add to that? I know you kind of had touched on that earlier.
No, I think Daniela, she said it perfectly. Just, thinking ahead again. I'm trying to get us to, where it can apply about what thinking for next year. It's just that we have to remember about that equity piece, which Daniela is speaking to around, sometimes, there may be one computer in the home and mom and dad are also being asked to work from home. And so their access to things is different. And then we have the flip side of that too, where, it may not be like that, but we just need to be cognizant of the kinds of activities we're going to do, and what we're asking them to do while they're at home. So yeah, that's all.
Just to kind of ladder off of that, I know we have a good amount of educators who have joined us, and I think a big question right now is measurement of performance and how intensely we should be looking at that. And I'll put this out to the group. Does anybody have a strong opinion either way on whether or not we should be measuring these kids during this times? I know traditional testing has been canceled, but as far as grading and reporting and things like that, do you have any advice as to how we should go back into this year when it comes to performance measurement?
Sure, I can give you my perspective on it. I think it's a difficult question to answer. And the reason I say that is every school and community might be doing something a little bit different right now. Some schools might be doing pass-fail, while others might do some form of modified grading. But what I think we need to do right now, since the school year is winding down, is kind of take a pause. And the reason I say that is to get ready for next year. Now, with that being said, I think that we can measure performance that can be done both virtually and in the classroom. That way we can pivot at any given point if we need to switch from one to the other. And to just kind of give you an idea of what that could look like, you could do things like individualized activities, something like cardiovascular running. And what that can do is involve the social component by having students provide feedback for each other. But you can also find ways of sprinkling SEL by maybe offering self-reflective questions. You could maybe say to your students, how are you feeling before you run? Maybe how are you feeling after you're done running? And what are you feeling, or what thoughts do you have while you're actually running? It's getting them to change their state of mind while they're actually doing it. And I think that's much needed right now, all those other things.
Agreed. Dr. Taveras, I'm curious. I think it would be interesting to get your perspective on the role of physical activity and physical education in schools as we sort of take a pause and think about, okay, what's working and what's not. I think parents are looking at their kids at home and they're witnessing more of what their actual day-to-day is like. Personally, I'm hopeful that this will elevate the role of physical activity and PE within the school environment. And I'm curious for your perspective as a medical professional, if you think this will.
Sure. So a lot of the work that I do and many of my colleagues at Mass General and at Harvard, we do a lot of work on the science of adversity, right? So how do adverse events, early life experiences affect mental health, physical health? And there's quite an extensive body of literature that shows that physical activity helps to mitigate the effects of early life adversity, that activity is almost like a buffer, right? So in the last few years, there have been some really terrific studies showing that children, and particularly children who've experienced early life adversity, the children that participate in physical activity, that have strong coaching, and the kind of group aspect and team building aspect of sports and activity, that those activities serve as a buffer for experiences of adversity in early life. And if that wasn't enough to encourage policies around physical education and physical activity in schools, we also have evidence in some of our own evaluation of programs like Box, for example, that in schools that have implemented programs like Box, and in particular a before school physical activity program, that those children, in comparison to children in schools that haven't implemented something similar, are healthier, and they have and report better social and emotional wellness and health. And so not only do we have extensive literature showing that physical activity is a buffer to help mitigate adversity in early life, but we also have really good evidence that programs like Box and others are really effective in improving children's social and emotional health. And so, you know, for many reasons, we wouldn't be on this panel if we didn't feel strongly about the important role of physical activity as part of a, you know, healthy routines, healthy lifestyle, and the role that schools can play in supporting physical activity through PE and other programmatic work.
Great. Dr. Duckworth, I see you nodding your head.
Yeah, I agree with everything Dr. Taveras said. You know, I think medical professionals don't think of exercise as an intervention. And it is not medication, it's not psychotherapy, but it's an important anti-anxiety and very important regulating process. A lot of child and adolescent mental health are dysregulation problems. You can't manage your emotions or manage your state. And exercise is very good for that. And it's probably the number one thing that I prescribe for anxiety before you get to psychotherapy, before you get to Prozac and all its cousins. Those actually do work. But one of the first questions is, are you doing something that is daily, regularly reducing your dysregulation experience? And during this profoundly dysregulating moment, it's particularly important to figure out how to keep kids in the exercise space.
I'm going to jump in there too. Sorry, just really quick, Daniela, and then I'll hand it right to you, I promise. But I do want to make, physical activity is important, but, our health and physical education teachers, I think we have to remember that we need our health and PE teachers. And I just want to speak to Shape America's role in that we are working with the CDC to help develop guidelines for reentry and to help with that and to protect health and physical education, because with this, we know that challenge is probably coming in the fall, and that with everything to what Dr. Duckworth, Dr. Tavares has said, we know that physical activity is important, and health and PE teachers help teach the skills that students need to live healthy and active lifestyles. And I think right now we can serve as guides. And I say we because I'm a former health and PE teacher, but we can serve to help our children with their overall wellness. And that includes that social emotional piece with it too. There's social emotional wellness, our physical wellness, and how can we assist them in taking ownership of that? And so our organization, Shape America, has helped to do that. And I'll pass it back to Daniela to add to that.
There are so many great points coming up in this conversation. And I want to first start by saying I'm really excited to see the resources, Michelle, that Shape America is putting out, because I do see this time, and even the time moving forward, as an opportunity for health and physical education to really shine and show what I always have seen as the true potential there. It's not just the physical, it's bringing in the mind and the emotions as well. Some schools even call their health and PE teachers wellness teachers now, to really emphasize that. There's another point that I wanted to touch on. As a culture and society, we tend to, both in schools and outside of schools, utilize sports as a way of teaching not only fitness and physical activity and self-regulation, but also as a way to connect with one another. In SEL, it's the outer world of relationship building, social awareness, and interactions. And that's something I think it would be helpful for us to be cognizant of. Might be a bit of a gap currently and moving forward. So questioning, how can I incorporate some more social interactions and meaningful connections within my lessons, within the structure of the curriculum that I'm creating, regardless of if it's in person or online. Because if it is in person in the fall, chances are and the things the sports we're playing aren't going to be the same as they were last year. So I think that's a great way for us to also say, all right, let's explore more individualized activities and recognize that there's a lot of potential there to use the body as a doorway to exploring the larger self. And with older students, what I typically say for individualized activities when I'm introducing it is it's a time to tune out the world and tune in to you. I think that's so needed right now. So recognizing there's a gap with the social aspect of team sports, but that there's also an opportunity with individualized activities.
And that sounds like to me, standard 5 for our PE teachers out there. We focus so much on standard 1 with our motor skills, movements, concepts, and those kinds of things. But she's speaking to standard 5, the value of physical activity that it plays in our life for health, for enjoyment, even for challenge in those things. And we have to remember that we serve as those people in the building. And as Daniela said, we are the most important subject, and it's being highlighted right now through this everything. We teach these skills already naturally embedded. SEL is touched on in our health standards and our education standards. So just making sure we can kind of position ourselves as health and PE teachers, like, hey, you already have us here, this person who is built into the school system to help with children's indirectly with their directly, because we talk about it and make it more of a front-facing thing that we're teaching about social emotional learning. We're intentional with our teaching. We're teaching about identifying emotions, and we can use physical activity as a way to do that, as a vehicle to teach about those things.
I have one follow-up question to that for you, Michelle and Daniela, is if there are audience members who are looking to restructure their curricula and consider those those values, are there resources they can look to modify? I know that Shape America has a number of them, but are there other communities or groups or other resources?
Well, we have an SEL crosswalk. So what I first say to do is like look at this crosswalk, and you can see where our national PE standards naturally align with the SEL core competencies. And so there's probably a lot of things that you're already doing in your classes that may naturally fit within our SEL core competencies. But where I speak to that intention, now you just need to kind of be intentional, let you know we're working on our self-awareness, we're working on self-management, and kind of put it a little bit more out there for students to recognize that that's what they're doing when we're doing these certain activities. I'm a big on the why, explaining why this is important that we're doing this. Why are we identifying our emotions? Well, when we identify our emotions, we learn more about ourselves, and that can help us make healthier choices. And the self-regulation piece, or we start learning, we're giving students strategies and tools. Well, if I know that I'm more moody when I'm hungry, then what I can do is I need to come prepared with a healthy snack or water with me, so that, being preventative and being proactive in that approach. So we have resources like that. We have our Health Moves Minds program, which has a ton of PE-based, standards-based lessons, our health ed skills-based lessons that speak to teaching social and emotional learning within our settings. And it's not, they're traditional activities that you may have done before, like parachute and things like that, but putting that like social and emotional learning spin on it. And we'll share those at the end so that we can give you links and all of that.
Great. And for the at-home environment, Dr. Duckworth and Dr. Taveras, we've gotten some specific questions on recognizing signs that our kids are struggling at home and what those signs are, and especially in that teenage environment, when is it just normal being a teenager, and when is somebody maybe showing signs of struggling? So I defer that question to you guys, and then Daniela, Bo, and Michelle, the same for the classroom environment when we do go back. So, first the at-home environment, I turn it over to you, Dr. Duckworth, first to talk about signs, and then Dr. Taveras, if you could chime in.
Yeah, I think it's hard to make generalizations, but the broad strokes are functioning, safety, and duration of symptoms. So everybody's felt terrible for a day. By exercising or going, out for a walk or engaging in a game, you change your state. So that's the duration piece. If your state is problematic, depressed, sad, upset, teenagers are less likely to articulate the words, I am sad. They're more likely to show you. They're more likely to be irritable. But you have to frame this through the fact that most of us are a little more irritable, and most of us are a little more upset. So, you got to give a wide berth. Functioning, if they're not able to complete their schoolwork, if they're not able to regulate their schedule, right? So if they're, staying up till 4 or 5 in the morning, 3 or 4 in the morning, that's problematic. Pediatricians are actually quite good. Pediatricians came to realize that half their work is mental health. And I'm sure Dr. Tavares can develop this some more. But anytime there's a safety concern, self-harm, anything like that, that's very problematic. Dr. Tavares, do you want to add to my commentary?
I think that's incredibly well said. The other thing that I will just add to that is that, we're seeing quite a bit of fear in people and families coming in, particularly for non-emergent or otherwise, routine care, and for non-routine care. Any concerns like those that have been mentioned by Dr. Duckworth, I'm worried actually that people are foregoing care and seeking out support because of the concerns of coming into a medical setting and potential exposure. And so the only thing that I would add is pediatricians and clinicians are open and are ready to hear your concerns, are ready to listen and hear out what are some of the new symptoms that you all and the parents or the teachers are picking up in their interactions. And so I just want to add to not be afraid to reach out to your clinicians if you are noticing any new symptoms, and to, I just prior to this call was on a 1-hour phone call about all of the phases that we as clinics and the clinics across Mass General, all of the things that we are going to put into place to ensure the safety of our patients and our clinicians. And I would just strongly urge parents that if they are noticing some of the symptoms that were mentioned, that they reach out to their clinicians.
Same thing for parents. If you have poorly managed diabetes, this would be a good time to call your primary care doc and problem solve. Should I come in? Is the risk-benefit assessment of infection versus neglective care worthwhile? So skipping an annual physical, well, that's fine in most cases. But the idea that, if you have an actual medical problem for adults or kids, don't ignore asthma in children. Attention deficit disorder isn't going to be better by this stress. So don't defer care out of a misapplied sense of safety. Call the pediatrician, call the primary care doctor, problem solve. How do you rate this risk versus the potential benefit? And don't just avoid care. Emergency rooms are really quiet now. And that is unsettling in terms of the long-term impact on people's health.
And Dr. Duckworth, can you talk a little bit more about telehealth and the options, just because I think a lot of our attendees probably don't realize they don't have to go in if they have anxiety about that?
Virtually every therapist in America is doing all their work through Zoom calls now. So a lot of regulations happened to make it easy for them to do so. You can use any device, including Zoom calls, FaceTime. That wasn't true before. You had to use a HIPAA-compliant, privacy-sensitive server. That's not true now. In Massachusetts and almost all across the country, all the copays are waived for telehealth. The providers are getting paid the same instead of at a discount for doing telehealth. And what we've seen, all my friends who are clinicians are working at 100%, 20% of capacity. Demand is high, and they are working. And most of them think this is actually a lot better than they thought. The people getting help find it's convenient. If you have 3 kids and you're problem solving with one of them, instead of taking 3 hours out of your day and getting into an office, you can do the same session in 45 minutes. Clinicians also report that the no-show rate is close to 0, and everybody shows up on time for their Zoom calls. So it's just interesting, right? Like, is this going to change the way we deliver care going forward? I think to some extent it will.
That's great. And then just to switch back to the original question about signs, Daniela, Bo, Michelle, as far as the classroom, whether it be virtual or in-person environment, are there specific things that you look for in students that may be a red flag?
So from my experience now, I can only speak to the middle and high school population, but I would say being lonely. If I'm noticing that I'm not hearing from kids, that's a sign that I need to reach out. And one of the things I'm really proud of, I sent private messages to every single student. It was a tedious process of 400 plus kids, but I think it was worth it because it showed that I was trying to connect with them. A key to happiness is relationships. And when we build relationships, it actually strengthens connections. So, I think just reaching out to make that stronger connection goes a long way. Just to give you a quick little story, one of my first assignments I gave the kids, they had to record themselves and then send it back to me. And what was interesting, this one kid had a guitar in the background. And I'll just kind of preface this story. I know nothing about how to play a guitar. I always wanted to learn, but just never got around to it. And one of the things I said to that student is, hey, if you're comfortable, I would love if you could play something for me. And wouldn't you know, about an hour later, he sent a video back of him jamming out on his guitar for about 5 minutes. And both Danielle and I, we watched it. So it was really cool. And I think that's one of the key things that we can do going forward if we're remote, that we can build those connections with these kids. Danielle, you want to add something?
Well, I was just going to say that's really true for right now. I think a challenge for educators is before, when you're in person and you see how they're dressing, their demeanor, how they're interacting, you get a lot more insights. And we were really the ones on the front lines, being able to report back to families and administration what was going on. But it's a little different now. So the signs that we're looking for now are that, are they being engaged? Are they distant? Are they not showing up? And really trying to make a connection so you can have more insight is really important and meaningful.
Michelle, let me know if you want to add anything there.
No, I think they said it perfectly. I think connection is so important. I think there are some pluses to being virtual, as you can even just hear, like sometimes there's advantages of the virtual piece of it. I can connect with you more quickly. I can see most of you at a time. So I think what Bo's doing is great, being able to connect so that those students feel connected and individually, you know, because sometimes there's people who, I'm an extrovert, so I'm one of those people that would probably like spill it out all in front of like 28 kids in my class in the Zoom, and then there's kids that are more private. So kind of taking some of that background of, about the kids that are in your class, and there might be some that need a little bit more individual reach out to those peers. And then even, maybe there's peers, like maybe I would be the good person in the class to go check on another student. And so if you have those leaders that were already in your class, maybe some peer-to-peer check-ins as well, I think would be really helpful too. Because a lot of times they're going to be able to identify and resonate with the things that they're feeling with one another than me as an adult talking to a child. So that would be the piece that I had there.
Yeah, and on that note, connections has come up a lot in the Q&A. Social media seems to be a way that kids are connecting right now at all different age groups. How much is too much? When does it become unhealthy? I think everybody on this panel probably has some thoughts there. I think everybody's pretty curious there. Dr. Duckworth, if you want to kick it off.
If I can say, I think social media, for the most part, has always been paired with in-school, face-to-face interactions. When we take away those in-person, face-to-face interactions and only rely on connections to be made by social media, we are seeing sometimes unrealistic portrayals of what life is like for some children. And I really worry that we are creating children who are forgetting how to socialize. And so I'm really interested in seeing, now that we are preparing for the fall and the schools are preparing for modifications to the curriculum, even virtually, how we might bring back that ability to socialize for children. How do we create these small group sessions where children can speak to each other and get past their social awkwardness? But it's concerning. I do worry that now the imbalance of reality and what is being put up on social media has its risks. It obviously helps with those connections in the void, to fill the void, but I do have concerns moving forward that it has to be more than just the social media that children can look to for those important connections.
I don't think there's been a lot of good research on this. As with marijuana legalization, we just got everybody to do this, and there was no thoughtful assessment of the impact on mental health. I think it's just complicated. I do think media in general, this is for parents and educators, the less media you consume after 3 to 4 or 5 o'clock in the day, the better off you'll be in terms of your own sleep regulation, back to exercise, back to the physical educators, encourage you to take care of your body. And social media, I don't have social media. Like, I don't participate in any of it. Am I missing something? I'm probably missing adorable baby pictures of nieces and nephews. I probably am. And I have looked at other people's in my life to see adorable baby pictures. But I think for the most part, You know, I had a student at the BU School of Public Health explain to me that it was so terrible for her self-esteem to see all these other people highlighting their amazing lives and never their particularly vulnerable or crummy lives. And she said, you know, again, this was the first time I heard this about 7 years ago. And she said, I've just stopped all of it because it's not good for me, because I compare myself to other people, and social media has a dimension of comparison, which, as you know, comparison is the thief of joy. So I think it's complicated. I wish we had spent more time evaluating it before every child got unlimited access to this, but this is the way we do things in a democracy. We get things out, and then we try to make sense of what that thing did. And I do think you have to recognize that there's a correlation, not a causation, with the increase in adolescent suicide with remarkable acceleration.
Daniela, you were shaking your head there. I don't know if you have anything you want to add to the conversation.
Well, I think they're all really wonderful points. One thing I would add is an interesting way of looking at it is your mental diet. You know, we think about our physical diet. What are we feeding our body? How are we nourishing it? And you're going to have some things that may not be so good for it once in a while, but as long as you're aware of it and it's in moderation, it's okay. Our mental diet is just as important. And kind of piggybacking off of what you just mentioned, Dr. Duckworth, is that's an interesting way to frame it up for ourselves, but also for students. Think about how what you're feeding your mind makes you feel, and that will make you become more aware of your mental diet and be more selective. Maybe chunk out 15 minutes in the morning and 2 15-minute slots in the afternoon to check the news and check social media, but then that's it. Feed your mind things that make you feel good after that.
And we actually have a great mini lesson through our Health Moves Minds program that talks for students about being mindful and really taking a look at their social media use, not social media, but just really their screen time as a whole. Now, a lot of times our phones have, you know, the time spent, you know, over how many hours are you spend with screen time, and they can even break it up into social media and all those things. So we do have a great resource that you could probably use it as a distance learning tool to have students look at their screen time now and really asking questions and get into that discussion. And it's really interesting, some of the middle school teachers that we see, kids know, I think, a little bit that Instagram can cause sometimes the self-esteem or can feed onto our ego and things like that. And so just kind of being more talking about it, and then what can we do to help combat that? Social media is there and it's a part of kids' lives, but what can we do? What can we put in place to help with it? And, you know, as Danielle is saying, you know, things that make us feel good and feed our mind in a healthy way. So we do have a resource around that. I just want to throw that out there for teachers to use. And even talking about our internal voice, all of these things lead to our behaviors, right? They stem into healthy behaviors. And one of the biggest things that we try to teach through this is that if we can identify and learn more about ourselves and create these healthy habits, even recognizing how we talk to ourselves, our internal voice, how it influences our behavior, how does social media influence our behavior? So having those kinds of conversations, then now it just makes it relevant when we have more time to have access to these things.
That's great advice for educators and parents, I think. We could all take something from that. We're at about the 5-minute mark, so I just wanted to give everybody the opportunity to give one more tip or piece of advice to keep themselves or their children mentally healthy during this time, or upon re-entering, hopefully, what will be a new, better normal. So Dr. Duckworth, I'll kick it off to you and we can go.
Yeah, I'm going to speak to one of the questions that I saw, which is for at-risk youth that may not have commercial insurance, can they do telehealth? And I want to emphasize in Massachusetts, where both Dr. Varis and I live, Mass Health is paying for video visits, but also flip phone, if you don't have the internet, for all mental health visits during this emergency. And the way you need to think about it is America is a patchwork quilt in terms of mental health coverage with a lot of fraying edges. So you need to figure out who is the person that you have insurance with, and you need to problem solve the benefits. But I want to emphasize Medicaid has done a very good job of stepping up during this time. And in our local state of Massachusetts, over 95% and 99% and 98% of kids have insurance, largely Medicaid. So I think there are more opportunities to get care, even if you don't have so-called traditional good insurance. Medicaid is actually quite good insurance in many states. And I think it's really important to recognize that mental health care is a benefit through Medicaid.
That's an awesome tip. Dr. Taveras?
I just want to end with some resources. I know we'll send these out afterwards. Happy to send these by email. But throughout Mass General, we have a number of different programs. One is the Benson Henry Institute at Mass General that has a terrific program called the Resilient Youth Program that offers courses and resources for parents. It's an unbelievable program, and I would strongly encourage those that are really thinking about building their children's resilience to look at the website. The other is the Clay Center at Mass General that also has resources in English and in Spanish. For those that are interested in kind of the science of adversity and thinking about these kind of buffer interventions, the Center on the Developing Child at Harvard is terrific. And I can't say enough amazing things about how important it is for us to look at these buffer interventions like physical activity. And so I'm happy to send those out, but just wanted to offer other resources to those that are looking for them across our networks.
Thank you so much. We will definitely pass those along following the panel. Daniela and Bo, do you want to add your last thoughts?
Sure. There's a positive I want to kind of share with everybody that I think from this whole experience for all of us. And I say this more from the teachers, the students, and I'm seeing the resiliency that we're all through this together and how we're able to bounce back. And what's really interesting from the lens of a health and PE perspective, I'm seeing all of us come together in new ways that I haven't seen before. And it's really cool to see that connection with everybody and that we're all here to kind of help each other. So it's definitely encouraging, and it gets me excited for the state of education, in particular health and phys ed going forward.
I would say be prepared as we move forward to, they're most likely, we all kind of know this, are going to be more children that have anxiety and trauma coming into this next school year. So maybe start to plan and be proactive about ways we can explicitly bring in SEL and the ACEs right out of the gates to really talk to students about that, talk to your fellow teachers about it, and proactively communicate that plan out to your communities so that parents can begin preparing their children so that we're as aligned as possible.
That's a great point. Michelle, I'll let you round it out here.
Sure. Great segue, Daniela, because that is exactly some of the things that I was going to suggest. If anything you do over the summer for educators, if you could start learning tips and how you can start incorporating trauma-informed practices into your teaching and be prepared for that. Also, if you're thinking ahead about how can you protect your position, how do we protect health and physical education, position yourself as this, how I am equipped to be the SEL expert in my building and provide health and physical education, and that is your role to help assist in guidance counselors and align with some of these other things. We're talking about school-wide overall wellness, and the health and physical education teacher is the perfect person already in the school building to do that. And so our SEL crosswalk can help you advocate for that, because it'll directly show the alignment between our PE standards and the things that you're already doing with SEL, and we're going to be releasing a health education version of that. So those are the kinds of things that I would start thinking about as we enter into summer to prepare you for the fall. Trauma-informed practices, what can I incorporate into my routines and put into my curriculum with students to think about that? And then how can I protect and position myself as a social and emotional learning, health and physical education teacher with this overall wellness and school-wide wellness piece in mind?
Wonderful. I think that is a great note to end this on. I appreciate all of your time. You are such a wonderful group of panelists. I knew we were going to run over because I knew people were going to have so many questions for you all. Thank you to the audience for being such active participants. I know we did not get to all of your questions, so if we can connect you after the panel, we will do so. Look for our email with all the resources that were discussed, and as always, you can always reach out to us at Shape America or boxkids.org. So thank you all so much, and
Thank you.
look forward to doing this again.
Thank you.